This miniature was primed with an airbrush using Vallejo's black primer. This was followed with an anti-zenithal spray of indigo and 2 zenithal sprays of turquoise and white respectively. A similar effect can be created with dry brushing, but I have an airbrush and I like to use this whenever possible. These initial colors will help the speed paints that I'll be laying down, but first, I'll be applying some brush highlights of an off-white. I'll only be showing parts of this miniature being painted, such as the Little Reaper's cloak and the scythe blade, and Sophie's dress, hair, and flesh. This will greatly reduce the runtime of the video, but ultimately, everything I painted on this miniature will follow the techniques used in the steps that will be shown, except for the wings. I kinda just added all kinds of colors from my palette to the wings, so much so that I stopped keeping up with it, and I have no idea what I actually did in the end. I add a second finer highlight with pure white only where I want to draw the most attention to, and making sure to leave the previous off-white showing. By the time I have this highlight finished, I'll have just under 2.5 hours of work invested into this project, including the time spent cleaning out my airbrush. As a spoiler to some problems I'll experience later in the video, it was important to put these highlights on in thin applications, particularly where you want a smooth finish, such as for fine silky garments or flesh. Because I'll be using speed paints later, any uneven texturing created by paint that was too thick or not applied smoothly will show by excess pulling of the speed paint. The Plasmatic Bolt speed paint that I used is from the old line, as I do not own the new 2.1 yet, which is odd considering this is my absolute favorite out of the bottle color that I own. I didn't use a lot of speed paint medium for most of the areas on this miniature, and instead I added a very minute amount of water to it, mixed well, and then slapped them on. While I was applying the white brush highlights before I began adding speed paints, I mentioned that I experienced some problems with pulling on the flesh. You'll start to see those problems here, as there's spotting created by unsmooth highlights. This actually would be a great effect for zombies or someone with a bad rash or some kind of disease. However, that's not what I wanted. I wanted that pretty Nicole Kidman skin, but what I got was Seamus skin after too many Gunther chops. Instead, she looks like she got plaque psoriasis. She got that bad case of the eczema. She needs that Dupixent or Opzelura. Why do I even know what these conditions are, let alone their treatments? Damn you, television and these cursed commercials. Next came a quick oil wash. For the oils, I mixed Viridian Green and Ivory Black for a dark green, Cadmium Red Deep Hue and Ivory Black for a dark red, Cadmium Red Deep Hue and French Ultramarine for a dark purple, French Ultramarine Titanium White and Viridian Green for a turquoise, Burnt Sienna for a brown, and lastly Ivory Black for my black wash. I slap these over their lighter counterparts, the dark red over anything red or orangish, the burnt sienna over anything brown, bony, or fleshy, blue over the blues, purple over the purples, etc. Except for the wings, I don't remember exactly how I applied these on the wings, beyond darker colors on the bottom and lighter on the top. The back was more blue and purple and black, and the front more red and fleshy, but those were the only steps I remember. I let the oil sit for about 45 minutes before gently removing them from the upraised areas using a makeup sponge lightly dampened with mineral spirits. I then let this miniature rest overnight. This is a quick look at my progress thus far. The speed paint application took slightly over 2 hours, and the oil wash application and removal about another 45 minutes, not including drying times. From here, I move on to where the bulk of my work will take place, the basic brush highlights. If I was batch painting small armies, I would probably just finish the bowl, cup, lips, eyes, and the base and then call it a night, but I want to push this one further, so I'm not even close to done. There isn't much to say here beyond each highlight going on smaller than the last, and when I get to her flesh, I don't just simply do one highlight of the colors shown. I apply these multiple times in thin layers, sometimes 4 or 5 times, to build up a full coat. I then go back a step and redo a shade or highlight as needed to slowly build a decent gradient and help smooth transitions as best I can. I've learned the hard way over the years that for some things, like small leather belts, you can get away with more of a bullet point approach. Use this paint, then that one, and it'll come out with a really good look. But the larger and more importantly, the smoother you want something to appear, especially skin, it's not a clear-cut path, and there's a lot of backtracking needed. At least for me, anyway. Typically, the more time I invest, the better the end result I have. I also start mixing in corticosteroids, I mean glaze medium, to help smooth her Gunther chopped eczema-like skin. Side effects can include high blood pressure, infection, depression, upset stomach, trouble sleeping. God damn it! When I finally get to working on the dress, I add hatching line highlights, building back up to white. Now I did this earlier with off-white and pure white at the very beginning before applying any speed paints, but I build these back up to bright white again, not entirely covering up the hatching line work that I did previously. This is to help reinforce the change in hue and add a little more depth of color. And this is where I stopped. I'm very happy with how this miniature came out, especially the highlights on the front of the hair, the skin, and the clothing. I really like the tones of the Reaper's cloak and the Demonling's flesh. The scythe blade isn't terrible, but if I spent another hour on it, it could definitely be better. For lessons learned, I need to go back and paint the hands with some of the darker flesh highlights, as I completely left them untouched after the oil wash step. This was not intentional. I was under a rough time crunch to try and churn this video out before year's end, and missing them was a result of me trying to work too fast. I also need to go back and add either some lesser highlights and much darker shadows to the rears of these miniatures, as they just look unfinished on the backs as opposed to being darker as intended. Another issue is that I use the same purples on Sophie's lips as I did her purple articles of clothing, and I don't like how the lips look. The purple is too dark. A more delicate paint would have been better, with no color darker than maybe magenta. My non-metallics are still awful and need a lot of work, but to be fair, I've only done 4 miniatures this year with non-metallic metals, and only 5 in the year before that. 2025 non-metallic metals will be something I need to do much more often, as this is something I want to improve greatly upon. The worst mistake I feel is a very harsh mold line in Sophie's hair on the top of her head. I had thought that I had cleaned it up well enough and that it would blend in as a strand of hair, but that definitely is not the case. Despite these issues, I'm still very happy with this miniature. When I compare it to the very first miniature I painted on this channel, it's insane how far I've come in the 3 years since I started this journey. I'm still a long way off from climbing out of the ranks of being an amateur, but I can look back and at least see that I'm making progress, and I can't wait to look back again after I get better at non-metallic metals, highlighting shapes and placement, and the dreaded mold line cleaning. And that'll bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or inspired to paint your own Christmas or holiday themed horrors. Beauties? Beautiful horrors? Opsalura for eczema? Damn it! If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you can support the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.